Hi everyone, and welcome to my video about making AJAX calls to some APIs. So let's get started. So what are AJAX requests? So jQuery AJAX calls are used to perform asynchronous HTTP requests. They can also make asynchronous requests if you specify it, but these types of requests are really meant to be asynchronous. So I would not recommend making them synchronously. They contain three different functions, and I'll show this in the next slide on how to utilize them. So the done function happens whenever the AJAX call successfully gets executed. So like whenever a 200 status code gets returned, which means okay, that it successfully made the request and it successfully returned the response. And fail happens whenever the AJAX call is not successful. So for instance, like a 404 error or a 500 error, which means like not found or internal server error. And that always happens whenever the AJAX call finishes executing. So you can really think of these three things as I guess a try catch finally block. The done would be the try, the fail would be the catch, and the always would be the finally. So, and then you can use Postman. When you're using Postman to test your API, your request to the APIs, you can actually use Postman to extract these AJAX requests as well. And I think I went over this in my previous tutorial on how to utilize Postman. So if you haven't watched that, you should go ahead and watch that. So here's an example of an AJAX call. This might look familiar already because we went over this in the Postman call. So this part might look familiar. This part might look familiar, but keep in mind or take note of the fail and the always. So here's our AJAX request, and the type of request that we're making here is a put. We're trying to hit up this URL, this http example.com API. The content type that we're trying to send it is in JSON format. Here's our data. We're stringifying this data. So JSON is a key value pair type of format. And then when you stringify it, it makes that whole format into a string so that it can send it over the request. And then when you get a response back, you get if it completes successfully, it'll execute this done. If it fails, it'll execute this fail. And then it will always execute this. So keep in mind, you need to send it data. If you're making a post or a put, like this, you should always send it data, and you should stringify it by using json.stringify and then your data in here. Here's an example of what I actually took out from Postman when I was doing the tutorial of how to use Postman. So you can see here that this created it for me automatically. I didn't have to do anything, and here you can see that this is an AJAX call, and here you can see that I'm making a request to this URL right here. So this is the order number. So this can be this can be a variable in here so that the user who's utilizing your application can put whatever order number they want, and then it just gets put in here, and then it makes a GET request. And then here's the AJAX call. So you can see here that I'm making an AJAX call. I'm passing in the settings in here. And whenever the function is done, whenever the AJAX call is done, I'm executing this function. And this function returns the response. Now the response is whatever this returns. So if it returns an order, for instance, then the response will actually be an order. And then this will output the orders. And then here is another example of an AJAX request. Here you can see that I'm making a GET request to this endpoint right here. And I'm not specifying an order, which means that this is going to get all the orders. This request is going to get all the orders. And then the response is going to return all the orders. So here it's going to print all the orders to my console. Now inside here, instead of printing it to the console, I can utilize this, and I'll show you guys an example of how to do this, but I can utilize this to do some business logic behind it in the front end. So just keep that in mind. I think I have some more examples here. So here's another example of me making a post request. Again, this is taken from Postman. I extracted this. I tested my request first using Postman, and then I extracted this or exported it using Postman, and I just copied and pasted it here. So here you can see I'm creating a settings here that I passed to this AJAX request, and I'm specifying the endpoint. And you can see here that I'm calling the add order endpoint. Now, if you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that add order is a post request, a post endpoint that accepts an order object, and it will create this order object in our database, and then it'll spit it out back as a response and with an order ID as well. So here you can see this is the endpoint. I'm making a post request by specifying the method here. In the headers, I'm specifying that this is a JSON object, that what I'm going to be sending to the front end is a JSON object. So you can also specify that it's an XML type of object, or various other types. So our application accepts JSON, so we want to specify that this is a JSON object. And then here I'm passing data, and you can see here that I'm stringifying this information. Now my endpoint accepts an order object, and it also accepts service IDs. So you can see here that I'm passing this like that, and this is how I'm structuring the orders object. And here I'm making that AJAX request. So I'm putting the settings in here, and then I'm capturing the response in here, and then I'm consoling it out. Here I was making a post, here I'm making a put. You can see here that I'm, the URL is this, the endpoint is this, I'm making a put request, and then here you can see my JSON object. So here I'm specifying that I want order ID number 19 to have this information. And so then that submits that data to the backend, to the API, and then the API responds back with the order that has changed. So when we get the response back, it'll be exactly like this. And then here's a delete request. So I'm specifying here the endpoint. I'm trying to delete order 19. The method is delete. And then headers, again, if you guys watch my previous video, this delete endpoint requires you to submit an API key, which I made it ABCD. And so it makes a request, and then it sends back the response. The API sends back the response of, I think it's true or false, or it might actually return back the order that it deleted. So this will print out the order information. Now, if I submitted an incorrect API key here, then I would actually want, a .fail here, and because then that will capture an incorrect the error that it would throw back. And here's an example of my website. You can see here that there's no customer ID or no customer name being typed in right now, and you can see that as I type, it's populating a list of customer names that I have in my database that have the letter T in it. And then I can select it. I can select, like, for instance, I selected this last one over here, and then it populates it in here. So the way that I do that is by making a AJAX request using get, right? So I'm doing something like this, but instead of specifying an order ID, I'm specifying the text that the user has inputted. And then what that sends me back is a list of strings into the response right here. And so what you're seeing here is that list of strings, but put into this nice HTML element with some formatting. And here is an example of my HTML element. So you can see here that I have a blank customer, which is just a placeholder for me to put like a bunch of these on there. And I have the customer list. So for every customer that gets returned back from the endpoint, from the API, I create a copy of this blank customer label, and I change the text and I insert it into this customer list. And then I do some CSS styling stuff to it. So that's just kind of how the code behind looks. Well, the front end of the web application for this particular section. And then this is what the front end looks. So here you can see that on the input, so this is whenever the customer enters in any information in that text box, this event gets triggered. Now, this event is also within the document ready event from jQuery. So just know that that's kind of up here. It's not shown in the screenshot though, but just know that you have to have that on there. You have to add these events on the document ready. So anyway, so whenever the user types something inside this text box, customer name, I collect the user's input right here. And, I just copied and pasted the Postman request. Here you can see that I'm grabbing the user's input and then I'm putting it right here, making a GET request, and then putting those settings here. And then whenever the request is done, I get a response back of like a list of customers. If it fails, I hide and I just empty that list, and then I hide that list because I don't want people to see this if it fails. But if it's done, I send this response back, that list of strings, over to this function. And what this function looks like is like this. So you don't need to know this for the AJAX requests, but just so you know, like how I'm utilizing it in order to create that list. So I'm just grabbing all the elements from that page. I'm emptying my list of customers, and then I'm iterating through all the responses, or through all the customer names in that response. And here you can see that I'm making a clone of that blank customer. This should actually be true, just so you guys know. But I'm making a clone of this blank customer. You can see that I'm getting the object here in the front end like this. Making the clone, and then I'm changing the ID. That way we're not doing some crazy stuff by keeping the ID the same as this. Otherwise, it's going to do some crazy cloning. So first thing I do is change the ID, then I make it visible, and then I change the text to be the customer's name. You can see S here, which is S right here. And then I append it to the customer list. So I clone that invisible, row, I guess you can call it. I make it visible. I set the name, so John Smith right here. And then I add it to this list, to this element. And this, I believe, should have r.length is greater than 0. So if there are items, show the list. And if there's not, hide the list. So how can you utilize the objects return? So here you can see that I'm getting a settings. So actually, here's the document ready event that I was talking about earlier. So here you can see that I'm making an AJAX request. Here I'm building up my settings thanks to Postman. And here's my endpoint. You can see that I'm making a GET request here, and I'm trying to get order ID 1. So here you can see that I'm getting the response back. What this is going to give me is the entire order. So first, I just want to show you guys how console.log will print the response, which in this case is the order. And the order, if you guys have been following along my tutorials, contains an object called customer name. So, it's the same thing here. I can access that customer name by just doing response.customer name. You can think of response, I guess, as order. It could have been better named as order in this instance, but just know that this is a response back from the server, so that's why I called it response. But could as well call it order, so this would be order.customer name. So here we're printing two things, the entire order and then the order's customer's name. So let's go to the next screenshot here. You can see here that this is the execution of this, the console logs. So here you can see that it console logged the order. Here it is, and I expanded it, and you can see customer name here, ID, ordered by, the order ID, these two are associated, the paid amount, service dates, all the services associated to it, and the total. So that is this line 76 right here, this console log. And then let's check out this console log. And this is just to show you guys that you can access the properties within this response. So here I did response.customer name, and it outputted this thing right here. So here I printed the response, and which has a property of customer name, and here I printed the response.customer name. So I'm able to access these variables or these properties just like that. So yeah, so I hope that this video helped to understand how to make AJAX calls through the API. Postman is really good for helping you guys generate these calls. And over time, you guys will get good and you won't need to use Postman to generate these calls. But it's always good to use Postman anyway to just, test your endpoints before you go and you start coding them. So yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to get more updates of whenever I post more content. All right, thanks guys. Have a good day. Bye.